Manera, it's me, AV. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Guys, I am so excited right now. I just had an idea for what because I've been thinking so hard about how I'm going to deliver value to all of you, giving me your time and being here watching this channel, right? There's only a few of you guys right now. Hopefully we grow, But I started to think about it, like, okay, what can I give them? What can I give them? And then, like lightning yesterday, the idea struck. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? You know what we're launching? Case briefs. Case briefs. What's a case brief? A case brief is a tool that we use in law school because typically you're given an assignment of reading a ton of cases, like a bulk load of cases, right? And what a case brief does is it prepares you for class because you have to come to class prepared to talk about the cases that you read. And what I realize is that the general public that is outside of the legal space, sometimes you just want a quick synopsis of what a case means and why it's important and why you should care and why does it matter and all of those things, right? That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give you guys 5 to 10 minute clips that recap these cases that are in popular news and media and things like that. So you know what we're covering today? Roe v. Wade. All right, people, kick back, relax, we're ready to go, okay? We're gonna talk about Roe. There's a very loud car going by right now. We're just gonna let the bass. Damn, that's loud. Anywho, is it gone? Okay, I think it's gone now. Okay, great. So now that the loud car is gone, we can talk about how this started. So what I'm gonna do is a lot of case research and, kind of dipping back into some of the books. And with that being said, you know what I had to do to prepare for this video? I had to dust off my constitutional law book. This is a thick book. Look at how thick this is. I couldn't believe it. No wonder why it was so expensive. This is the thickest book that I have on my shelf. I can't believe this, all right? But anywho, I had to dust this off, go back to Roe v. Wade, and I gave it a really good read for you guys. One thing I'll tell you about Supreme Court decisions is that they are long. I think that's why that book is so thick, because they are very long, drawn out opinions. They're challenging to read, especially if you are assigned a lot of them, but that's okay. We're gonna get through Roe, but let's get it together. So here's how this is gonna work, right? I am going to break this down as if I was writing a case brief. So there are gonna be different sections, and I will section off the video, so if you just wanna quickly get through those sections, in the future you'll be able to do that, okay? So, introducing our first section, which is basically the title of the case, okay? So with this, I also wanna educate as we do this, whenever you see a name, the first name, which is the plaintiff, you'll see the V in the middle, that's versus, and then the second name is going to be the defendant, okay? In this case, Roe is the person that is the plaintiff, actually not her real name, okay? And we have Wade, who is the attorney suing on behalf of Texas, okay? So this case was decided in 1973, and it was an opinion written by Justice Blackmun. Okay, so what's the issue? What is the issue? I always find these issue statements being funny. The issue is really, you'll find that it means what has brought us to court, okay? What are we fighting over? What are the people litigating over, okay? And the issue in this particular case is whether the constitutional right to privacy protects a woman's right to choose an abortion, okay? So that's the issue in this case. Let's talk procedural history. What's procedural history, okay? Procedural history is just kind of like how the case moves through the court, okay? How does it go through the court system, the legal system, right? Because typically what will happen is sometimes you'll have a case that starts in a district court and then it moves up to the state level, the state court, the highest court in that state. Then sometimes maybe it'll jump to federal. Maybe sometimes it will go to the Supreme Court. And in this case started in a U.S. district court in Texas and was decided in favor of Roe, but the attorney for Texas decided to appeal this case. So it moved up to the United States Supreme Court. Now we gotta talk about the facts. This is where it gets juicy, okay? The facts section is where all the tea lives, okay? So what that means is all the tea comes here. This is the details that kind of surround how we got to where we got to. So in this particular case, what are we looking at? You're looking at a woman, Roe, legal pseudonym, because we have to protect the interests of children. So whenever there are children involved in legal cases, their real names will not be used, or they will be shortened or changed in some way, okay? So we have Ro, who's pregnant. This is her third pregnancy, her third child, and she wants an abortion. So what does Ro do? She tries to get an abortion, and it's illegal in Texas at this time. The state of Texas, the only time that it could be done is if it was needed to protect the life of the mother, okay? So that's what we have. Ro didn't like that. She thought it violated her constitutional rights. So eventually this ended up in court. Now, when I reread this case, I think I've mentioned to you guys, Supreme Court decisions are long, right? But it's because they go through history. And this is a prime example of that. So Justice Blackmun, when he wrote this opinion, had 4 key sections before we get into the legal rationale about what we do next, right? And it started first with ancient attitudes. Ancient attitudes, you're like, what is that? They go all the way back to the Greek and Roman times to see how the public thought about abortions back then and what the general line of sight of abortions was. Let's start somewhere. It was like a baseline, right? The second thing they talked about was the Hippocratic, I always struggle with this, the Hippocratic Oath, okay? Also from Greek and Roman times. The Hippocratic Oath is a general set of guidelines and principles that medical professionals use today, right? So that was largely talked about. The third thing and most important thing they talked about was common law. For those of you who don't know, common law is, it's almost like an imprint, so to speak. I like to think of this as an imprint. It is British law, right? Laws from the UK back in the day, right? A lot of our laws today are not a subset, but almost not a duplication, but very similar to British laws. Because if you think about America as a country, we're still fairly relatively new. Those laws and that baseline had to come from somewhere, so we use the model of our cousins across the pond, right? So that's where that came from. But what they talked about particularly was a concept called quickening. So between 16 to 18 weeks of pregnancy, that is when the fetus begins to move. And the reason why this was discussed was because they wanted to put a starting point on when life begins when it comes to pregnancy. When does life begin? That fetus starts to move during this time, okay? So that was another piece that was really important to the development and how we talked about this case. And then the fourth thing was American law. When did we start talking about abortion and enacting them in American law? It happened in 1821. Connecticut was one of the first states to enact abortion laws, okay? So that's really where we start. And then the next section was really discussing how did we get these laws? How did these laws start, okay? And there was 3 things here. 1, Victorian social concern, hence why I'm wearing one of these skirts, right? Like it felt very Victorian. It felt super Victorian. But meaning, what is Victorian social concern? That is the era in which these laws kind of started, was in that time era, right? Think about what that time was like in the 1800s. You didn't want people running around doing, various different sexual acts that were frowned upon, right? Like, we didn't want that. The second thing was medical procedure. A lot of women were going underground, almost like the equivalent of the Victorian black market, getting abortions, and they were dying. They were getting hurt. They were having long-term medical effects. This was dangerous back then. You didn't even have light. You had candlelight. You had candlelight, okay? So that's the thing, like you're thinking about how dangerous this can be, and we're putting lives at risk. So it was an interesting thing. And then the last thing was the state's interest in protecting life, right? If I'm a state, I'm gonna make sure that people in my borders are protected. That includes the lives of women that were putting their lives at risk, but also the lives of unborn children are equally as important. That's why the quickening mattered, okay? Those are the general facts, but at least it gives you guys a baseline of what's happening here and why it kind of started from the bottom and it's kind of led to where we are today in 1973. This is where it gets a little choppy. okay? Because it's the court's reasoning. This is what they were thinking. These are some of the concepts and things that kind of help them come up with the decision that they came up with, right? So let's talk about 3 things here. First one, the 14th Amendment, the right to privacy, and the due process clause. Okay, we know that there's a Constitution. There are a lot of things in there, right? There are a lot of things in there. The Constitution has a provision that prohibits the government from unfairly or arbitrarily depriving a person of life, liberty, and property, right? The 14th Amendment regulates the states on impeding on those things, okay? So there's that. I could talk about due process, but I do think you guys generally understand what due process is. It's kind of widely known, so I'm not gonna spend time there. But I wanna talk about substantive due process, and here's why. When I was doing research for this video, Justice Scalia had done an interview back in 2009 mentioning that this was going to happen, that Roe v. Wade would be overturned at some point, right? He's like futuristic thinking back then. I think it's widely known, but this kind of came up. And he mentioned that substantive due process was something that the courts just kind of made up and developed. But here's what that means. The 5th and 14th Amendment require legislation to be fair and to be reasonable in content and to further a legitimate government interest. So that's something that's super important, and here's why, right? There's different levels of scrutiny that the Supreme Court will use when they need to evaluate a particular problem, issue, or question, right? In this case, especially when it comes to governmental intervention, right? You need to have a level of scrutiny. In this case, it was strict scrutiny. And what that means is one question. Is the law that is in question necessary to achieve a compelling government purpose? In this case, yes. It was needed, right? You had women dying, like there was all types of stuff happening. It was crazy. But lastly, I just want to talk about due process and equal protection, because this is where there is a view of a fundamental right. Privacy, in this case, being one of those rights. If I want to make a decision about what I need to do, why does the government need to impede on that? That's the whole crux of this case, okay? So let's talk about the holding. Lastly, holding is funny. Like, I always thought it was a funny word in law school. I'm like, why can't we just say result, right? Because that's what it is. It's essentially a result of the case. So here's what happened. In 1973, in January, the Supreme Court had a 7-2 decision ruling that the due process clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution provides the right to privacy, and that protects a woman's right to choose whether to have an abortion. It also ruled that this right is not absolute, okay, and that it must be balanced against government's interest in protecting the health of women and prenatal life, right? They broke this out into 3 trimesters. So the first trimester, the second trimester of pregnancy, and then the third trimester. There are different implications on what can happen and who gets involved and how the government gets involved in those trimesters. So we've gone through our reasoning. What's the rule of law as it is right now? The rule of law is no state can ban abortions as it violates the fundamental right of privacy. You know, guys, I try to keep my personal opinions out of these things, and the reason why is because in these videos and case briefs, I want you to just walk away with the facts and to have the background on what the case is, why it was decided the way it was, and just have the fundamentals so you know, like, hey, you know, people are running around talking about this. It's a very controversial issue. A lot of people have different opinions on it, and, you know, I'm not going to state my opinion publicly here, but one thing I will do is provide you guys with the details that you need to be informed. Thank you guys for watching. This is my first case brief in this series. We're gonna do a lot more of these. You know, believe it or not, these things come up all the time. There are thousands of cases we can do, seriously. But at least before you go to other platforms or decide what you want to think or do in other places, let's start with the baseline. I hope you join me next week, because this may be overturned next month. So you know what we're gonna cover? You know what we're gonna cover next week? Planned Parenthood v. Casey. We're doing that one, man. I hope to see you guys next week. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you soon. Bye.